This story is a two-parter. Whether or not they are connected, I'm not sure. However, both happened in the same area, and both were extremely unnerving. Let me start with a little bit of info about myself. I served as a soldier in the US Army for the better part of 9 years, and spent some time with a mountain warfare infantry unit. I'm 31 years old, 6'1", and approximately 195 pounds. I'd like to consider myself a fairly competent woodsman, and have always felt at home in the mountains and forests, where I call home in upstate New York. These stories take place in the Adirondack Mountains. Now, I've always had pretty good understandings of the wildlife in my region, the various species of larger game that one could expect to possibly encounter on deep wood excursions. Animals that may give you trouble if you aren't cautious. Animals such as black bear, moose, coyote, fisher cats, bobcats, etc. There is one creature I never bothered with, and that's simply because up until now I was positive it didn't exist. The creature I'm speaking of course, is the Sasquatch. I have a couple of friends who are self-proclaimed squatchers, as they're apparently called, and they constantly are doing research and telling me all about them. This information will become relevant later in this story. So, it's August 12th, deep in the southwestern edge of Adirondack Park. I and a good friend from work, Carrie, had set up camp late that night. We only unpacked what we'd need for sleep and figured we'd finish unpacking and setting up the following day, when we had some ample light and time to do so. The first night went off without a hitch. The following day, we unpacked the rest of our gear, got set up for what was to be another 3 days of pure relaxation, or so we thought. This trip, however, was about to get really weird. As the sun began to set, I got to chopping some wood, building a nice fire, cracked open a beer, and got ready to start cooking dinner. It was a beautiful night, 70-something degrees and clear skies. The fire was roaring and I was already a few beers deep in by the time the sun had set completely. We sat by the fire, listening to some music and laughing, when all of a sudden, we were blindsided by this overwhelmingly rancid stench. It was unlike anything either of us had ever smelled before. Almost like a sour, wet dog, stinky foot, musky smell that literally made us both look at each other with like, whoa, what in the hell? This smell lingered for about 10 minutes or so, and then was gone. We didn't think much of it, and decided to head down to a creek nearby, sit on some rocks, and stare up at the night sky, admiring the abundance of stars. We sat there and marveled at how many we could see. After about 30 minutes, we decided to head back up to camp. Just as we had gotten up, there it was again. The god-awful smell. We paused for just a moment to confirm that we both smelled it. Before we took another step, we heard a huge splash just behind us in the water. We both froze and looked at one another. "What the heck was that?" I said. "I don't know," she said. "Can we go back to camp now?" We double-timed it back up to our camp and sat there for the rest of the night on high alert. For the rest of the night, nothing happened, but that stench would come and go randomly as the wind shifted. The following morning, we went back down to the creek and I grabbed a rock, probably the size of a softball. I thought to myself, and I threw the rock into a random section of the creek, around the area we were sitting. Sure enough, it made the same exact splashing sound, like the one we heard the night before. Now this is significant according to my squatcher friends. Sasquatch allegedly has a very unique, rancid smell. Also, they have been known to throw rocks directly at or towards people. I'm not sure if what we encountered was a Sasquatch, but I know for a fact that no known animals from that Adirondack mountain area enjoy throwing rocks. Anyway, fast forward to October 12th, exactly 2 months later in the same area. The weather was less agreeable this time, but we weren't going to let that stop us. It wasn't too terribly cold during the day, but it was constantly raining, and at night it did get really chilly. This time around, We were going to get much closer to something that quite frankly scared us both shitless. Our second night at the camp, we had to turn in early because the rain had become quite heavy and the temperature dropped to about 28 degrees Fahrenheit. We got cozied up in our sleeping bags and shut our eyes, listening to the sound of rain hitting our tent and the nearby creek which was now raging from all of the rain. Just as I felt myself starting to drift off, I heard it. A loud sniffing sound, coming from my right side, where Carrie was currently bundled up in her sleeping bag. Unsure if she was still awake, I whispered, "Was that you?" A brief pause, and she replied, "I was about to ask you the same thing." Then again, we hear this loud sniffing sound, loud and long. Not like the typical sniffing you would associate with a curious animal that was being inquisitive. Right after that, a second sniff. I heard slow, deliberate footsteps moving closer to the tent just behind us. They were heavy. They sounded sneaky, but most importantly, they sounded bipedal. Another sniffing sound came. I thought I was going to get killed, or I don't know, I just had this primal feeling. So I grabbed a hold of my machete. What I know about the vast majority of wild animals, even bears, is that they are very skittish. Loud noises tend to scare them off pretty easily. After a couple more steps, I began to unsheath my machete. "Hey!" I yelled. Silence. For a good 30 seconds. There was nothing but silence. We didn't hear the pitter-patter of quadruped fleeing in fright from the sudden loud scary man. There was nothing. Then suddenly, another loud sniff, and I heard the footsteps change course and begin to circle around my tent, to my side. Oh crap, I thought to myself, as I could hear this thing literally stop about 3 feet away from my side of the tent and sniff again. It takes a lot to rattle my cage, but at that moment, my heart was pounding. Now, the presence of whatever the hell this thing was bad enough, but the strangest part of the ordeal, all the sound suddenly stopped. The footsteps, the sniffing, it all just went silent, and we didn't hear it leave. As this damn thing just kind of vanished somehow. Maybe it climbed a tree, I don't know. But for the next couple of hours, I was awake, clutching my machete. I heard nothing but the rain and the creek. Just thinking about the whole ordeal still gives me goosebumps. And going back next month, hopefully, whatever it was, doesn't. For an entire year, I was plagued with a reoccurring dream that came monthly. In this dream, Tyndall Air Force Base and Mexico Beach were destroyed by a massive storm. These two locations are next to my town and are connected by a highway surrounded by pine forest. The part of the dream was Tyndall always had buildings wash away and disappear with the rain. I remember in the dream, the shoreline would no longer look the same after the storm passed. It looked and felt so real. The part of the dream that got me was not Tyndall, but Mexico Beach. In the dream, I drove from the destroyed military base down the familiar highway to Mexico Beach. The houses were gone and the sun was setting, only a silhouette of the forest remained. Then, suddenly, a faint glow would illuminate a makeshift town of sorts inhabited by ghosts. It was as if these ghosts assembled a new little village out of the wrecked houses and boardwalks. I remember entering this village and interacting with the people. They either didn't know they had died or simply ceased to care. They were faded, washed out, and slightly transparent. The thing that stood out the most was the oil lamps hanging over their doors. Their soft glow was not warm like a normal lantern should be. It was as if there was a memory of a flame. The people acknowledged and interacted with me. At one point, they brought me a small bag of sweets because I had no money on me. Their gift to me touched my heart. At the end of the dream, when I left the village, I turned around to see a silent, dark forest once more under the evening sky. No village, no people, no glowing lanterns. There was an emptiness and a sorrow in my heart. These dreams weighed heavy on me because I kept having them often. Thus begins the weird events that I feel are connected to my dreams. Let's begin with a fishing trip I took a few months back after I retired from the military. Mexico Beach was a place my husband and I would go fishing regularly. One night while there, we were alone under a sky full of stars. Behind us was the forest and in front of us was the beach. No one lived on that side because it is owned by the base. There are no houses on that side of Mexico Beach for miles. I remember that my husband went to grab his cell phone that he had left in the car. I told him to go get it and that I would stay here so he could find me. While I was alone and waiting for him, I would see white figures out of the corners of my eyes. I looked further down on the beach and saw the soft glow of an oil lamp moving as if someone were carrying it. The light grew dim and then was gone. My husband returned to me very shaken up and told me that on his way back to me, he thought he had spotted me. When he walked up to the person that he thought was me, he realized that they were wearing a white gown and that it was not me. The person vanished into thin air and we left soon after. Fast forward to October 10th of 2018. The great and merciless Hurricane Michael came to shore. Me, my husband, my father, and 3 dogs hid in the laundry room while we listened to the wind roar and rattle our home. When we emerged, we saw our town ripped up. This storm was angry and felt as though it were sniffing at its victims. Every single tree around us was either broken in half or torn from the root. Roofs were peeled like oranges, personal objects scattered like confetti. Our world was turned upside down. There was no power or water for weeks. We would soon come to learn that Tyndall and Mexico Beach were completely destroyed, just like in my dream. I remember feeling sick to my stomach with the realization that it wasn't just a dream. I had seen events that would come to pass. The nights that followed the storm were dark and quiet. Something invisible would trigger the motion lights we set up. The lights flashed wildly, but there wasn't anything triggering the lights. Yet, they kept coming on. My dad decided to sleep outside to make sure it wasn't a looter. My husband and I were in our bedroom with the window open, hoping for a breeze. About 1 a.m., we hear an otherworldly scream. I know the sounds of all the wildlife around me because I have lived in front of some woods for many years. This was neither an animal or human. It was a scream full of rage, devastation, and anger. I shot up from the bed and told my husband to get his gun. I grabbed a broom and marched outside to retrieve my thoroughly spooked father. We had trouble getting back to sleep. The night after, I had a very strange dream. In my dream, the ghosts of people who died in the storm came to me one by one. Each of them would hand me a coin and walk off only to disappear. I remember looking into my hand at all the muddy coins. I haven't dreamt of the storm anymore, but the motion lights flash wildly from time to time like that, and sometimes we hear that scream in the wind. This is a true story that I've only told 4 people. This happened while I was serving as a reservist in the military back in 2010. It was that time of year where we were summoned to do annual training, which was 2 weeks long. We convoyed up to Camp Roberts with about 10 HMMVs and reached our destination in about 6 or 7 hours. The max speed limit was 55, no more or no less. We arrived and unpacked and had lunch and then began our training. Skip to day 5 of training. We had been doing a lot of training which mostly amounted to PowerPoints on the screen. I was excited because the next day we would be at the range for weapons qualification and other hands-on weapons. We got up the next morning at 5 a.m. after just doing fire guard from 2 to 3:30 a.m. Physical training was from 5:30 to 7 a.m., after which we had breakfast and went to the armory to retrieve our weapons. I was excited. I was next and I handed over my CAC card, and a few minutes later, I was handed a super clean M4A2. I cleared it and off I went. We began the long but nice trip towards live fire training, a good 5 miles from our barracks. You drive by and see cool training areas like the bayonet training, tank driving classes, 300-meter ranges, etc. We get to our range and begin to see the long process of Weapons 0 and weapons qualifications. I ended up with a 36 out of 40. the best at the boot camp, which was 38 out of 40, so I think I did pretty good. It was around 5 p.m., and we began cleaning up to head back for dinner. After we did a little class on buddy carries, we began to get ready for bed after the last formation to do a head count. My NCO then came up to me and said that I have night guard tonight at the range to watch ammo. I reluctantly said Roger, Sergeant, and began packing for the night. Water, food, and smokes. I threw on my cold weather Army-issued thermals and began heading for our HMMV. I and my battle buddy then began the 30 to 40 minute drive past the gate we just left a few hours ago. The drive was very nice but bumpy. I sat shotgun with my M9 holstered, enjoying a nice dark and starry night. I still remember the huge hills after every bend and turn on the road. We arrived at our range and they were happy to see us. We shook hands and exchanged some info before we said goodnight, and they were off to the warm barracks. I was content though. I get to be up all night with a pistol on my side, and my buddy's M16 was more than comforting. We knew people weren't stupid enough to come and steal ammo on government property. So it would be a chill night with one up for 1 hour while the other slept and switching every hour. The ammo was sitting in a 20-foot metal trailer you see on 18-wheelers. Doors facing our little cabin, in front was the long, deserted range with the HMMV facing perfectly for a good view of everything. I was asleep, but still half awake. I felt my buddy kick my boots and I opened my eyes. He had that face on, and I knew something was up without asking because we had loaded guns, so it was no time for jokes. We exited the HMMV, guns pointed, and I was behind him and asked, "What's happening?" He said, "I don't know, I saw something." We marched forward toward the metal container and swept around. I saw a super quick bright dash of blue and baby blue light. With that, my buddy dropped to the ground, slumped like he had no backbone. I pulled him to the side and slapped him a few times. He was slurring like he was drunk. I shouldered his weapon, looked up towards the HMMV, and began to drag him. I was tugging and tugging, and he felt like he weighed like 300 pounds. I looked back and noticed a human silhouette a good 15 feet away. I jumped back and fell on my ass. I was so shocked to see another being, I yelled in a hysterical voice, "Stop! Identify yourself! I will open fire if you approach me!" I slowly got to my knees, pulled out my flashlight, and flashed the mysterious figure. My heart stopped at the sight of this thing. It was... I can't explain. I was shitting bricks. It's hard to explain. The sight was unbelievable. Half of its body was showing, with the other covered by a thick wooden pole. It stood there like a shy child at a new elementary school. Shy but curious about these new faces. It stood there, 6 to 7 feet tall and super skinny. Its skin scaly and grayish purple. Eyes small and beady. Small nose with a big long mouth. It edged out more, exposing its male genitals. Its long, creepy arms stretched out and tugged on my buddy's ACU bottoms. I pointed the weapon at it and yelled no. It let go and just looked at me like it was puzzled. I pointed my handgun, pulled the trigger, but nothing seemed to happen. My gun was jammed. I racked it back and started to pull the trigger, and nothing. But it didn't matter though, this thing was just gone out of thin air. I thought I was going crazy. I sat in the HMMV with my buddy passed out in the back. I chain-smoked my pack with his rifle in reach. I was scared, but at the same time lost. I stayed up all night till the morning. My battle buddy finally woke up not knowing a thing. I told him what happened, but he didn't believe me, so I kept it to myself and only told a few others. When I was 19, already being in the military for just under a year, this is relevant to a point I want to make later, I was home visiting in the summer. A friend and I were camping out in the branch of the Canadian River, where all the locals go mudding and rock crawling. My friend, I'll call him N for this story, was smoking trees, and I had just opened my second beer, and we were waiting on 2 more of our friends to come on out. It was an incredibly pleasant night for camping. Perfect weather, clear sky, It was about an hour after sundown and we had just got to our camp, set up, and were chilling and listening to music. Procrastination at its best. Our campsite was literally our campsite. It was far back in the most difficult to reach area where you either need to hike for miles or have a serious off-road capable vehicle. It's at the base of a train bridge that spans about 500 feet, with the bridge being about 100 feet above the river bottom and sheer cliffs on either side. Many times we would be camping and trains would go across at night. The conductors would have flashlights out as a little hello when they see our fire, and we would wave back. Because of the age of the bridge, or just their SOP, I'm not sure, they would always slow down before traversing, so it's usually a crawl. This night, we happened to look up and see bright lights over the rim of the cliff. Thinking it was just a train, we waited and watched until the train crested over the rim. That was when I noticed that the bright lights over the rim didn't progress along with the front engine when we actually saw the train. The front car had its own lights, but the night sky was still lit up like there was a train coming. Like I said, normally the conductors would wave and honk their horns, but this one was silent, even when we shined our lights up at them. Then I saw it, hovering above the train and moving at a slower pace, was something that took my breath away. If I had to guess, it was about 15 feet above the train and had all kinds of lights on board. We both stood there and stared at it until it was perpendicular to us. Then it stopped. M started walking towards it with a look on his face that could only be described as wonder, kind of like the look on Abu's face in Aladdin when they first go into the Cave of Wonder. When he got closer to the bridge, it slid to the opposite side until he got under the bridge. Then it slid back towards me. When M saw that he couldn't see anything, he started to come back, and it slid back over the train, which was still moving, by the way. After he got back to where I was standing, a spotlight came down from the craft onto us. The light was so intense I could feel the heat from it. This thing was at least 100 feet away from us. I remember falling to my knees and being unable to look away. I also couldn't breathe properly as soon as the light turned on us, like that feeling you get when you're about to pass out from oxygen deprivation. But I didn't pass out. I don't remember if M had the same experience, because all I was seeing was the light. Then, the spotlight turned off and the craft started moving along with the train again. About 3/4 of the way across the bridge, the craft veered off and climbed at a crazy speed until we couldn't see it anymore. After the thing disappeared, it took quite a few minutes for me to get my mind right again. The phrase we've chosen to tell everyone, then we kept repeating in our head for some reason. Naturally, one doesn't go and plan on telling people anything along those lines unless you want to be branded crazy. M and I had no explanation for what happened, so the following conversation didn't progress past, "Did you see that dude?" I told him what I was thinking about the whole situation and the whole tell everyone part, and he would only shake his head. We both knew it was a bad idea, so until tonight I haven't mentioned it to anyone. Another thing we noticed was that the portable stereo we were listening to somehow lost all power sometime during the event. The batteries in it were dead along with the extras we brought with us. The clock in his truck also reset and the battery had to be jumped the next morning. It didn't have enough power to turn over, only to barely run the electronics. The size of it would have only been similar to a Chinook, except that there was no sound. I've been around and in shit hooks, and they are so ridiculously loud they need hearing protection or you'll get permanent hearing loss. Its acceleration was also greater than that of any helicopter I'm aware of, especially one that size. It was all quite strange, to say the least. It was July of 1976, and John had closed up the shop for the week to take a break and go up camping with his friends to a regular spot they did yearly. They were going camping in the Canadian Rocky Mountains, which are a beautiful place to go and be. He took with him 2 co-workers from the shop at the time, and 2 other close family friends. They packed some beers and of course their guns and tents. They all set out on a 4-hour drive north and arrived later that day around noon or 1 o'clock, at which point they drove their trucks down some forestry roads for a good 30 kilometers into the backwoods. This was because despite machine guns being legal, police and conservation officers of the time would often still bother you if you were using them. Going in, they began to pitch their tents, which mainly consisted of old World War II and Korean War military tents, and stored their firearms in the tents with them in a large box. Their day was spent doing some shooting at just about whatever they wanted, with the exception of live animals. A few beers later and a cooked dinner, they decided to pack it in for the night, at around 11 p.m. The first night, none of the men woke up. However, when they awoke at around 7 a.m., they found a huge amount of the grass in the clearing they had set up pressed down and a trail of grass leading off into the brush directly to their south. This raised a few eyebrows, but they attributed it to it being a deer. During the day's hiking to some of the shooting spots, they stumbled upon a bog in the middle of the trail which had not been there the year before. In the mud, they noticed very large footprints, just shy of being 2 feet long, imprinted in the mud at the edge of the bog. Upon further inspection of the area, they could see the faint outline of some same-size footprints almost 5 feet behind it in the dry ground. The footprints continued straight into the bog and out on the other side. John and his friends were packing serious firepower at the time. John was carrying a Belgian-made FN-FAL battle rifle. All the men carried automatic weapons except for one, so they seemed very confident in dealing with an angry animal if attacked. Continuing on and into the valley about 1 kilometer away, they caught a glimpse of something peeking down from above the ridge. About 3 minutes of walking later, a large boulder about the size of a pizza box, but round, came flying down at them with great speed, which was followed by a noise John said he would never forget. The noise was a blood-curdling scream and growl. Further down the valley floor was another scream which replied to the first. The men quickly turned back, realizing that there was 2 of them, as all of them loaded their magazines and ammunition into their weapons. They made it back to their clearing by sundown, only to find their tents had been torn to shreds and everything was scattered about their camp and torn open. One of the trucks also had a smashed back window and huge dent in the side door, which rendered it useless and unopenable. The men quickly pieced together what was happening. John had always been a believer in Bigfoot and was now positive that they were dealing with one. About a minute later, a friend of John's raised his AKM assault rifle and fired a few shots to the other side of the clearing, saying he saw something huge and black run in behind a fallen tree over the top of a ditch. The men then fired a huge volley of gunfire into the tree and suppressed the ditch and tree. As the fire stopped, that same kind of scream was heard from behind the fallen tree. It was at that moment, from the east of the clearing, a huge creature stepped in. At least, allegedly anyway. John described it as being 7 to 8 feet tall and was covered in pitch black hair, not fur, which was heavily matted. Its face was ape-like according to him. He estimated that the creature weighed easily 600 pounds or more. Without hesitation, John fired his FAL at it. Now, anyone who has a lot of knowledge of firearms knows that the FAL fires a very large 7.62 x 51mm bullet. On full auto, the weapon was hard to control, but John estimates that at least 5 of his shots connected, not to mention the barrage of bullets from other men, 4 whom had machine guns, quickly cut this creature down. He swears he had killed it. The sight was something to see, he said, as the creature had been hit over 45 times by various calibers of bullets that were designed to kill humans and nothing else, as they were made for military weapons. All the men immediately jumped into their trucks and sped off to get a forest ranger from the nearest station. Upon returning, the next morning the body was gone. However, the ruins of their camp were still there, along with an incredible amount of blood left from the creature. The blood was even on the trees, in which indicated that several rounds had passed straight through. The ranger took some photos and said that they would close off the service road and investigate. John and his friends returned to their hometown and have never talked about it again until sharing this. Now, my dad was a former US Army, Navy, and later became a biker once he was back stateside for good. He had seen a lot and shared as many of his experience with me as he was able before he passed in 2011. If you don't mind, I'd like to share a few more of them with you. This is a story from my dad back when he was in the Navy. It was close to the end of the Vietnam War, and the ship they had just boarded had seen a lot of combat missions. I will try to tell this story from his perspective as best as I can remember. One evening, I had just finished PT, and my buddy and I were headed to the mess hall by ourselves. We had been walking through the ship, and minus the sounds of the engines far away and the sounds of waves sloshing the side of our ship, all was quiet, since most of our crew was either in the mess, in their quarters, or at their stations on deck. At one point during the walk, we arrived at a multi-level crosswalk with one below and another above the one that we were currently walking on. You can definitely tell when anyone is on or near another. The sounds echo in space. Though tight, it was open. Our crosswalk was a straight shot to the mess hall. As we were walking and laughing, we heard the door behind us open and close. Now this is a heavy metal door. Not one that you can just open without a lot of purpose. We turned and stopped, thinking another one of our squad decided to join us. But there was no one there. Confused, I looked at my buddy and he just shrugged. He turned around to continue on, but before we could take a step, we heard very loud footfalls again. We turned back around and all the sound of the steps, but again, there was no one. The footsteps grew louder, and we began looking at the other crosswalks to see if anyone is there. Nothing. It's such an open space, you would see someone no matter what. When the sounds were about halfway to us, we began to feel the vibrations from those steps on the metal railing and floor. My hair stood up on end. A cold feeling began on the back of my neck. Mind you, I saw combat already in Vietnam as a staff sergeant when I was previously with the US Army. I'd seen some of the worst of humanity out there. There wasn't much that could really frighten me anymore. This was bizarre. Slowly, my buddy and I turned to each other, and in mutual agreement, we both decided we were going to back away from this situation. So, we began backing away. I think once we heard our footsteps out of sync with the others, it became real to us. Like, this is really happening. We took off like a shot. We ran all the way to the end of the crosswalk and burst through the doors into the mess hall with panicked looks directed back at the way we came. One of the naval officers closest to the door started asking us what the heck we were doing causing such a ruckus. Truthfully, we didn't want to say that two seasoned Navy men were running balls to the wall into the mess of fear of being called cowardly. I think the freaked out looks on our faces gave us away since the officer developed a look of understanding. His eyes landed on the doors and we hurried through as he nodded almost solemnly. We knew then that this was not the first time it had happened to someone. Between constant career changes, extensive travel, and unusual upbringings, I can safely say I led an exceptionally rich life. This being said, I have lots of stories, albeit few are probably appropriate for the horror theme of this channel. Still, I figured I'd share one of the things that happened to me, and maybe we'll see if there's desire for more. They say everyone's army experience is different. Some people engage the enemy in close combat, others never even deploy. People have different jobs, and really there's no way to sum it up in a single sentence or phrase to people who haven't experienced it. Oddly enough, I feel like the story is the best illustration of my life as to how real the phrase really is. During my enlistment, I was stationed in a base in the Chihuahuan Desert. It was a pretty boring place, with not much besides sand dunes, long stretches of sun-shattered highway, scalding heat, and a plethora of impoverished people surrounding the base. That being said, there wasn't much to do unless you go off post. It was at this duty station where I met my friend Forrest. Forrest was a really great guy. Like myself, he signed up for the army because he legitimately wanted to serve his country. While he was very, very intelligent, he wound up being in the infantry out of dedication. Anyway, being such a nice dude, Forrest was inclined to give those of us who didn't have a vehicle at the time rides in the town. It was always nice driving in his sports car, so on boring weekends, I'd ride along whenever he felt like driving somewhere. On this particular day, I don't remember where we were going, but we were going down an open highway. Since we're off post cruising through a little Latino area, Forrest was going a lot faster than he normally might under the circumstances. You see, on the post they pull you over for going even 1 mile over the speed limit. That means guys would really book it when they got off the post. Anyway, we were bolting down this desert freeway when we noticed a box in the distance. Looking back, the conversation as I remember, it was only a few seconds. Through the piercing of the wind, I heard his voice as he began steering the car towards the box. "Hey, see that box in the road? I'm gonna hit it." Laughing, I responded how that would be funny, but whoever was inside might mess up his car, so he shouldn't. With a defeated smile, he swiftly steered away and said I was probably right. The desert was littered with junk, and hitting it at the speed might not be as much fun as it would seem to, two bored privates. As I said, the conversation took all maybe of 6 seconds. As Forrest passed by and nearly hit the box, we immediately saw movement in the rearview mirror. We weren't really prepared for what happened next. No, it wasn't an alien or a cryptid species. Instead, a child crawled out of the cardboard box, stood up, and ran away. I turned to Forrest and he was literally in shock. He didn't seem to have any idea of how he was supposed to react. It was like he didn't even believe what he just saw. What, was that a kid?" he asked, completely mortified. "Yeah, that was definitely a kid," I said, laughing. "Good thing you didn't hit that box." We spent the rest of the ride asking rhetorical questions, like why a kid was in the box in the middle of the desert. There wasn't a nearby town for quite some time. Eventually, reasoning the kid might have been a developmental disability kid or something, we turned back to check on the situation. There was a box but no sign of the kid. So when I think back to that phrase about how everyone's military experience is different, I can't help but try to figure out where this story fits in the narrative of my life. I am a 6-foot female who is now 25. Back in 2013, I decided to enlist in the Navy in order to pay for my college education. I was placed into the job of an aviation ordnance man and was sent to serve on the USS Peleliu. I'll do my best to explain all of this, and to those with no military background. The USS Peleliu was an LHA or amphibious assault ship. This is basically one size down from an aircraft carrier, so pretty large, housing about 3,000 people when it's at full capacity. Just a big metal floating city. The top is a flight deck like you see in the movies like Top Gun, but isn't quite big enough for an aircraft that require a runway like jets. These ships launch different types of helicopters and Harriers, fixed-wings aircraft that can take off and land vertically. The amphibious part refers to the fact that the back of the ship opens and floods to launch small boats, typically full of Marines and small trucks. As an aviation ordnance man assigned to the G3 division on the ship, I worked in the spaces down in the deep parts of the ship below the waterline where all the weapons these aircraft would carry were stored. Large elevators carry the weapons up to the flight deck to be loaded onto the aircraft. This story took place in 2014 when the ship was out on deployment. We were in the middle of the ocean, thousands of miles away from US soil. I worked the night shift from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. This meant that most of my shift took place during the darkening on the ship when all the lights that could be seen from the outside of the ship were turned off and switched over to red light, as to not give away our position. So, as I said, I am a female. At the time, I was 21. Also on my shift, there were 3 males around my age and maybe a little slightly older. One other man, worked in the office space a floor up from our shop, manning the phone and the desk in the case of an emergency. This was the Polilu's last deployment, as the ship was about 35 years old. There were several ghost stories that would go around, and certain spaces really freaked me out at night. As an example, the small dumbwaiter that carried food from the lower storage spaces up to the crew's kitchen had been out of commission for some time, supposedly because years prior it had malfunctioned and a Marine looked into the shaft to try to see it was gone. As the story goes, while he was looking, the dumbwaiter fell and took his head straight off. There were lots of stories like that. So, on this particular night, we did our turnover with the day shift. We didn't have much to do that night, but we didn't want the day shift guys to know this, or else they would give us their busy work. So while we were waiting for them to finish writing emails home and clear out of our shop, my supervisor said we should all go down to one of the magazines and wait there. Out of sight, out of mind, as they say. So we went down to the magazine, magazine 10 to be exact. Trying to describe where this is located in full detail would be very difficult for someone who's never been on a ship, so I'll stick with the spark notes. You had to climb down to a fairly out-of-the-way part of the ship that was known as Shaft Alley. It was called this because it was a small room with 4 scuttles on the floor. If you opened any one of them, you would see a ladder that went straight down about 3 stories. If the scuttle was open, you could step right into the hole and fall. It was fairly terrifying. Once you made it down one of these ladders, you would find yourself facing a large door with a high security lock on it. Only the people in my division were authorized to have the key, once they were put on the access list, that is. We had to check out the key from the armory. It was not a space that was just allowed to be walked into, or that anyone who I didn't work directly with would even have the reason to know where it was. Once you opened the door, there were 2 large rooms filling the inventory, and in one of the rooms, there was another scuttle that leads down one deck into another room. Each room had a thermometer in it, and the night shift was responsible for recording the room temperature from each of them every night to make sure space never got too hot for the hazardous material stored down there. So, anyway, we go down to the magazine and close the door behind us. The guys all make themselves comfortable and make casual chit-chat while I put down my backpack in the corner and take down all of the temperatures, so we wouldn't have to come back down later. Once I was done, I sat on the floor, opened up my backpack and started doing homework for a distance college course that I was taking at the time. Somewhere, while I was doing my homework, I fell asleep. I woke up in a panic with drool all over my assignment. Great. I walked between the rooms of the magazine and called out to see if anyone was still there with me, but I was alone. I went back over to my books and started loading up my backpack to leave when I noticed a pair of dark eyes looking directly at me from behind some pallets. For some reason, unpanicked, I said, "Hello?" in a friendly voice. The eyes and the dark figure, they seemed to be attached and darted to another pallet beyond my view. Just when we hear someone enter the room, the main door to the magazine in the other room, I go over to check it out and see Johnson, the kid who works in the office space upstairs during the night shift. Confused, I asked, "What are you doing down here?" He explains that our boss had asked him to take an inventory. As I'm offering to help him, we both hear a crash on the other side of the room where my backpack is and look at each other, totally freaked out. He says, "Who else is down here?" To which I reply, "No one." Just as I say this, out of the other room darts a little girl. She looked about 9 years old and completely unkempt and was wearing a pair of children's pajamas that were about 2 sizes too small. She darts across the room and down the scuttle into the lower space. Just then, I wake up. I'm still in the magazine on my homework, just like before, drool and all. Pretty spooked, I sit up and look around. I'm still alone. While I'm still trying to gain my bearings and shake off the nightmare, I hear someone entering through the main door of the room. I walk over, and wouldn't you know it, it's Johnson. I say, "What are you doing here?" again, but this time I'm shaking. He says, "I just told you, Chief wants an inventory." I stare at him for a second and say, You just told me like a minute ago? I just talked to you? That actually happened." He looked at me like I was crazy and he was like, "Yeah." To this I respond, "Then there's a little girl in the lower?" And just then we hear a blood-curdling scream coming from the lower space. I'm getting goosebumps now just typing it. The scream scares the hell out of me and jolts me awake. alone in the magazine, face drool covered in the assignment again. This time I'm terrified out of my mind, and I've started crying. I run immediately over to the phone on the wall and call upstairs to my shop. My supervisor answers, "Firebomb, Petty Officer Lutton speaking. How may I help you, sir, ma'am, or chief?" I sputter out shakily, Hey, this is Glover, I'm in 10, you guys left me down here." He chuckles and says, "Yeah man, you passed out." I reply, "If I'm not in the shop in 10 minutes, please send someone down to get me." He hesitates, clearly a little annoyed, but he can hear I'm really scared and says, okay. I pack my backpack, lock the space, and fly up the ladder like a bat out of hell. When I got to my shop, I told the guys what happened, and they spent the next several days mocking me mercifully over it, joking that I'm a medium and I talk to dead kids in my dreams. I now go to a different space to record those temperatures at night, and Davis goes down to 10. About 2 weeks later, we're all in the shop and Davis goes down to record his temperatures for the night. He had been the worst about making fun of me, so he didn't mind going down to that haunted magazine. This night he comes back to the shop white as a sheet saying, nope, screw that, to himself over and over. Whenever we asked him what happened, he says that while he was climbing down the ladder, he could hear a little girl singing, clear as day. He was so scared he came straight back up and didn't even get the temperatures. He wouldn't go down there alone after that either. This stayed a joke in my division for some time. Then, several months later in the deployment, one of the new guys that had been sent upstairs to work in the office's kitchen for a few weeks comes back. We ask him how his time up there was, and he tells us he met the captain of the ship. From the way he told the story, the captain said hello and asked the new guy what his job normally was, to which the kid answered that he was an ordnance man. The captain said, "Oh, so you work down in the magazines. Have you met the Shaft Alley Sally yet?" The new guy said no and asked the captain who Shaft Alley Sally was. The captain tells him that 20 years earlier the ship had what's known as a Tiger Cruise. This is when family members of sailors got to go out to sea with the ship for a day or two to see what ship life is like. Supposedly on this cruise, there was a young girl, the daughter of one of the officers. The scuttle in the shaft alley had been left open and the girl stepped into the hole and fell to her death. The ship was decommissioned in 2015 and sits inactive in Pearl Harbor now. I have no idea what any of this means, but it was definitely one of the weirdest things that has ever happened to me. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this while they were in the Navy or just in general? Back when I was in the Navy, I was doing my time as a mess crank. Everyone who enlists has to take their time and bust up their bones as a mess crank. This entails working for the cooks for a couple of months doing things like cleaning, vegetable prep, serving the chiefs and officers, and my favorite, the scullery. I love the scullery because all I had to do was scrub the dishes, clean the absolute crap out of the dish room, and go sleep in my rack, while everybody else was still slaving away. While I was cranking, there was another guy cranking too. His name was Leslie. I say was because he has since been sentenced to death, but we'll get to that later. Leslie was a stocky guy of Haitian descent, and the cooks were the white, nerdy type and were intimidated by Leslie, so whatever he refused to do fell upon me, as at the time, I was working in the dining room. Time went on and I got sick and tired of pulling his weight and working hard while he relaxed. I would ask him for help and he would just tell me to screw off, so I would put my heavy kitchen trash into his trash and ask him to help me with my trash, knowing he would say no. Then I'd watch him struggle to take out his trash and mine, not even knowing. Anyway, more days passed and I had enough of the cooks. They were too scared to ask him to do anything, so I confronted him and told him that he needs to do more, as I was tired of doing all the extra stuff. I told him that I liked him, but I was prepared to fight him. He declined, and we eventually became friends. And I got to know him as a nice guy with incredible intelligence. Fast forward some months and we are no longer cranking, but doing our regular jobs. One morning, I arrived at work and learned that Leslie had killed his wife, bludgeoned her sister, and stabbed himself several times in the throat. I also learned that he had a history of violence, and my mind immediately went back to the times that I played pranks on him and called him out for a fist fight. He was a tough-looking guy, but I had no idea that he was a killer. I look at his declining my invitation to a fight as him sparing my life. I'm not sure how creepy this is, but it definitely involves someone I would never want to meet again. Let's put it that way. After offering my account to the tribunal for the deaths of 4 soldiers, they didn't want to know anything about it. So, maybe you would like to read about it from someone who is actually there. This is a long read, but if you ever wanted to know about the brutality that actually occurred, then this is definitely worth reading. March 1996, I am the age of 16 and joined the British Army. When you join the armed forces in the UK, you start with 10 weeks of basic training, as I was just going to be an army chef. I attended the Pirbright training camp for what I thought would be the worst part of army training. I couldn't be more wrong. Now back then I was super fit and very happy-go-lucky. I took the training even though I was incredibly tough. There was horrible accommodation, bad food, and you ran rugged from 4 AM to 9 PM every single day. I got through and passed, but I still remember my passing out parade and how proud my mom was watching me in my uniform marching around. After you finish the hell out of boot camp, you go into phase 2, which is your trade training, which depending on what you chose you wanted to be or where you went would be different. For me, as a chef, I was assigned to State Omer Barracks in Aldershot. However, until your phase 2 training started, everyone, no matter the trade, went to the Deep Cut Barracks. It was a delightful camp about 1 mile from Pirbright, so only down the road. Initially, I was very excited to be leaving basic training. After all, the food was better. You could have duvets on your bed, and the regime was nowhere near as strict as Pirbright. When you first arrive, you were all put into a new arrivals building, sharing a room with 10 others until they decided what platoon you went to. I assume on the length of time you would be there. So I settled in for the first night. I knew a few of my roommates from my training platoon. My very first night on the camp, I got a glimpse into the realities of what Deep Cut was. I woke up at around 1 AM because I needed to go to the bathroom. Upon getting to the door, before I could open it, 2 guys in gas masks carrying pillowcases barged into the room. They ran straight to the far bed and proceeded to batter a lad sleeping in the bed with what looked like an outline of helmets and pillowcases. After watching this stunned, I thought I should get help when I noticed the corporal who was in charge of us that night was holding the door open for the 2 guys. He looked hammered and was in hysterics that was unfolding. The assault lasted for probably 30 seconds before they ran out, followed by the corporal at the door, and I could hear them pissing themselves with laughter as they ran down the stairs. After helping the battered lad to the bathrooms, I watched him clean up himself. Neither of us said anything at all. He looked about my age, was probably about 16. What could we do if one of the people in charge was involved and behind this? In the next few days, I came to realize this camp was basically where sergeants, corporals, and officers went if they had failed in their career for punishment. What better people to look after 200 to 300 young impressionable soldiers all between the ages of 16 to very early 20s. They got drunk and did things to us for their own amusement. I had the hope and knowledge it would be okay. You normally spend 1 night, at most 2 weeks there. I would be out of here soon. Day 3, I got called into the sergeant's office. He explained due to the fact that they were short on army chefs, no one wanted to be an heroic army chef, so they were critically short, I had to wait at Deep Cut for enough chefs to pass basic training before going on to my next phase. After asking how long, 3 months was the reply. 3 months at this hellhole. I thought it couldn't get any worse. I was very, very wrong. At this stage, I got introduced to my platoon while I was at Deep Cut. By my brand new platoon sergeant, I will refer to as Sergeant G. He initially sounded very friendly and spoke with a soft Sunderland accent. He started by laying down ground rules, cleaning, etc. It was at this point he warned us about the evil twin. We all laughed, but he wasn't joking. He said if we came across his twin, it wouldn't end well, and left us at that. After speaking to a few of the lads that had been there for a week or so, they reiterated the warning along with "Do not get on Sergeant G's radar, just keep your head down." It was at this point I began hearing rumors of the suicide of a soldier and the involvement of Sergeant G. Apparently, he had made this soldier the target of his evil twin and made his life an utter misery, tormenting him whenever he could. It was a few days after that I personally witnessed the evil twin in action. I and a few lads were in our room when a pigeon flew in through the open window. After several hilarious attempts to shoo the bird out, we failed and the pigeon carried on flying around and landing on lockers. This is when Sergeant G enters the room and asks what's going on. After explaining about the pigeon, he says, "I will show you how to catch him." He then proceeded to jump from the beds in the air to catch the bird. At first this was hilarious and we were all laughing, as was Sergeant G. That is until this went on for at least 30 minutes, maybe more. He just didn't stop, he was relentless. The poor pigeon was probably scared to death at this point and got himself caught by Sergeant G. Now what happened next I will always remember. Sergeant G put the pigeon's head in his mouth and bit it clean off. He then spat the head out onto one of the beds and threw the body out of the window. Stunned by this, we just stood there, while the demented Sergeant G kept saying Evil Ed's had his dinner. He was just laughing. While this was probably the most psychotic events I witnessed, the sheer cruelty of Sergeant G was legendary. One day in the height of summer, he made us push a huge temporary road around a field bare-handed. If you have ever seen a temporary road, it's basically a gigantic roll of rubber and steel. Being jet black and being in the sun all day, this thing was incredibly hot. It was so in fact, all of our palms and fingers turned into huge blisters on each hand. After inspecting the damage to our ravaged hands, he shouted at us for not having men's hands, even to the woman. Not satisfied with this, he ordered us to grab a huge rope from the back of the Land Rover and ordered us to tug of war with it as this rough strip of rope until the blisters all tore our hands to shreds. The pain of the raw flesh of our hands was incredibly hard to deal with, especially when he then ordered us to do press-ups on the hot concrete afterward. There was almost no time to even recover. The booster injections they give everyone became infected in a few of us. Sergeant G's evil twin made it his mission to find who had an effective booster shot and would punch them in the spot as hard as he could. To this day, I still carry the scar after he exploded my infected injection. Of course, he made me do press-ups while the blood and pus poured down my arm. He would do things like that, hiding under beds like a real-life boogeyman, waiting to see everyone and see who would dare to talk about him or anything like that. It was boring, honestly. The man was a lunatic for sure. While at Deep Cut, time went slowly. All we had to do was whatever the delightful training staff would come up for us. One day, the LT in charge announced that we were going for an exercise for 2 nights and 3 days in the woods around Sandhurst. On the morning of the exercise, Sergeant G gathered everyone on the parade to get everyone organized and announced on the exercise some of his SAS mates might make an appearance and interrogate people during the exercise. I didn't think much on this as he always was giving us unveiled threats. This exercise didn't actually start off that badly. The weather during the first day was gorgeous. It was very sunny and for some reason, they didn't take this opportunity to do some running with the kit in the sun. The night settled into guard duty. To explain, you and your Basha mate, Basha is a hole dug in the ground for where you slept in, will take a stag duty, which lasts about an hour. The guard duty itself involves you lying down in a camouflaged hole dug especially for the guard duty. Then, one of you will go to the next Basha and tell them it's their turn, so on, so forth. At the end of our turn, I went to the next Basha and whispered it's their turn to stay on. A low voice that sounded like a Scottish accent came from the shelter aggressively telling me to go away. I didn't recognize it at first, and thought to myself maybe the SAS thing is true. Maybe I can be a hero and capture Sergeant G's mates. Imagining what Sergeant G's face would be in the morning if I reported that I single-handedly repelled the SAS attack. I cocked my SA-80 with a blank round and demanded whoever it was show themselves. Silence. Angrily, I pulled back the poncho covering the Basha to be greeted with what could only be seen as Sergeant G's naked body. He was in the Basha, shagging one of the female recruits, and must have put on a weird fake voice to throw me off. I stood stunned as a furious naked Sergeant G leaped to his feet, telling me not to say a word about this and to get back on guard duty. I couldn't quite see how angry he was because it was dark, but I could hear the fury in his voice. I now was on his radar. He was married, and I was now witnessing him having sex with some woman whilst on exercise. I knew he would have to do something about this. The next morning things seemed okay. Sergeant G didn't even acknowledge me, which suited me. The exercise carried on into the night, and the weather this night wasn't really like the night before. It was a torrential downpour, and I was assigned to the 3rd stag duty, which is around 1. I seem to recall. Weirdly, I was told that I had to stay on with the girl that Sergeant G was shagging, which was odd as it meant my Basha mate didn't have to do guard duty. I'm not sure why, but I wasn't suspicious about this sudden material above. We carried on with the guard duty, chatting in low voices, bored out of our minds as the rain hammered the waterproof material above. All of a sudden, I felt a tremendous weight crash through our canopy and right onto my back. Someone from behind grabbed me from my helmet, and then I could feel this knife against my throat. Pulling my helmet tighter, backward, it felt like someone was headbutting or hitting the back of my helmet with something. He demanded I drop my rifle in the same Scottish accent I heard the night before. Pulling me to my feet, he ushered me toward the dark forest. Glancing down, I thought I was going to die as I caught a glimpse of the girl I was on guard duty with, and to see how terrified she was when she locked eyes for a moment. Then she carried on laying down with her hands behind her helmet. I remember stumbling through the woods for probably 10 minutes in the pitch black when the voice ordered me to lie face down on the ground. Dropping down in what was a huge muddy puddle, I tried to keep my head and face above from the water so I didn't die from, suffocation, drowning, etc. The voice then demanded my name, rank, and number, which I gave him. He didn't believe me and said he would shove my head into the puddle, when I assumed was his foot. Daring to look back up slightly, I could see 2 pairs of boots, which I know must be Sergeant G and probably one of the corporals. The other one didn't speak at all. They then started asking about how many people were in our platoon, and who was in charge, etc., which obviously gave them all they wanted to know. Being 16 and terrified, being alone in the woods, what was I supposed to do? I knew it was Sergeant G, but I didn't want to make him angry. This, of course, had the opposite effect. He gave me what felt like a right kick in the freaking testicles as hard as he could. The pain from this was excruciating. I felt like I wanted to throw up. Every instinct was to curl up in the fetal position, but they wouldn't allow me to. This carried on further for 20 to 25 minutes with them asking things of how great Sergeant G was and other corporals in the platoon, to whom was the biggest slag in the platoon. No matter what I answered, it was met with violence like kicks to the ribs. My fingers trod onto the point where I felt thin stick whipping the back of my thighs, and thankfully they got bored and realized they couldn't carry on doing this without actually killing me. I was ordered to my feet and led back to the area of our platoon, and camped out and told to go ahead alone when fairly close. After retrieving my rifle from the girl who was still on stag duty alone, she asked what happened. I always remember this as I didn't want to seem like a coward, and I told her nothing had happened and they had just asked me questions. However, I was crying inside. All I wanted to do was go home to my mom, as pathetic as that sounds, but I just felt violated. The next morning was the end of the exercises. Sergeant G gathered everyone, after some debriefing mainly about how bad we had done before. He then announced that his mates from the SAS reported that they had interrogated a few people while staring at the whole time. The whole march back, all I could think was how he was going to get me now. Everyone knew what he was like, and without doubt, I would be targeted by him now. The misery was unbearable. I wanted the march to last longer because at least everyone was present so he couldn't single me out. We got back to the camp and everyone set about cleaning gear when I was told the officer wanted to see me. My heart leaped thinking the girl may have reported what happened. Would this be my savior in a way as it was? The officer informed me that there were enough people to form a training troop at State Omar, passing out to Purbright, so I would be leaving that week. Thankfully, I managed to avoid Sergeant G for the whole week, and I volunteered to set up the field for RLC Day, and was under the supervision of a different sergeant, thank God. So that's it, my epic tale of Deep Cut Barracks as mentioned at the start. I tried to let the tribunal know what occurred there, but they don't want to know. This man affected me in such a way that I still have reoccurring nightmares. I've rejoined the army and he is going to get his revenge. As for Sergeant G, don't worry about him. Boys and girls, he got his just desserts for all the years of torment he doled out to vulnerable young soldiers. The army recognized this and promoted him. He is now the officer in charge of recruit welfare in the British Army. This I wish was a lie, but it is not. So I'm not sure if this is scary, and it isn't my story but my dad's who had shared this with me. Now, I'm a Navy brat and now an Army wife. I have a few crazy stories, but this one has always stuck in my mind. Here's a bit of backstory. My dad was an E3. For people who are unfamiliar with the rank, he was a seaman. His job was a stoker and the engine maintenance. He was roughly 115 pounds. Now, being so small, he could fit into places others couldn't, so he would frequently have been lowered into certain areas that require you to have complete trust with your team. So my dad had been aboard his ship for about 7 months, and he had complete trust with his family. That's what he would call his team. Now, this particular day started out like normal. He was doing his checks when his friend started acting weird. Now, this guy was straight-laced when it came to his job, as it's dangerous, so he usually was not on some foolish stuff. My dad had to do a weekly clean in an area, and he had to be lowered by his friend who was the partner for the day. So my dad was rigged and ready to roll when his friend started talking seemingly to no one. The more he spoke, the more he became aggressive. My dad said the guy kept repeating, "No, and that's not how it works." So not sure on what to do, my dad calls his boss over. That's when stuff went south real quick. His friend picked up the wrench and started attacking the main panel in the control box, the controls of the part of the engine and the filters, and yelling for the woman to leave the ship, and he wasn't going to give my dad to her. Now, you're probably thinking a mental breakdown of some sort, but no. Anyway, the rest of the crew came rushing over to help stop him, and that's when he started attacking others, saying someone had to leave or they would die. Finally, they subdued him, and everyone went up to find out what was happening and checked for any injuries. This was lucky for my dad, as he had been hit on the head and needed to be attended to. Within 5 minutes of being with the doctor, the place that he was in caught on fire. You're probably thinking it was because it hadn't been cleaned. Wrong, as this was an area that just needed the sludge to be flushed out, so there wasn't any electrical wires or flammable substances. So it wasn't a normal explainable thing, and no one knew what caused it or how it started, as the hatch was still locked and airtight. So, once everything calmed down, my dad pulled his friend to one side and asked what the hell happened. His friend kept saying that the woman wanted to kill my dad and the others, and he wasn't going to let that happen. He said it was because they had been promised something. My dad was like, what the heck? Now, my dad had been docked off at the coast of Africa, and a lot of them went ashore, but my dad had duty, so he didn't bother. While my dad didn't go ashore, his friend did, and they went to this town that had voodoo and crap, and one of them got into an argument with the local. Long story short, the guy said he put a curse on them, and one by one they would die. My dad was not a believer in it and just laughed, but his friend was serious about it. Before my dad could say anything else, his friend has taken off. His friend had a full mental health check and was found to be sane. Obviously there were repercussions, but my dad didn't know what happened after that. So a week after, another one of his friends died in a car accident. Then another had a fall and broke his back. The final thing was his boss had committed suicide not long after my dad was transferred to his new post. He later found out that his boss had taken a liking to the local's daughter, and was, for a better word, found in a compromising position. The guy was married, and the father of the girl wanted him to marry his daughter in payment. He said there were a few odd things that happened, but didn't go into detail. Now that happened over 40 years ago, it seems like it was yesterday. I'm not sure what to make of it, and my dad isn't someone who believes in that paranormal stuff, but we still can't come up with a logical explanation. I'm just grateful my dad got hit in the head, or I wouldn't be here today. At the time, I was serving in the military overseas in Yokosuka, Japan from 2012 to 2014. Since my time there, I was settled and been there for 2 years and seeing a very lovely girl named May. May had told me she was pregnant with my child while I was on my deployment. I took responsibility for my actions, so we started to plan. During the second year of my service during the winter, 6 months since May gave me the news, my ship had been in a dry dock for a year, and each ship, depending on how large the ship's crew is, had a handful of duty sections. This was a group of crew members who watched the ship and took care of it while the rest of the crew was off. So my section was on duty this night. Then during our evening meal, one of my shipmates asked me if I could switch watches with him. Being that my current watch was standing in freezing cold for 5 hours, he thought giving me his barracks watch would lift my spirits up. It did. I took the proposal in a heartbeat. We both let our section leader know of the change. At 23:45, I was on my way to the barracks to start my watch from 2400 to 0600. The barracks watch was there for safety and to see that the right people were in their respective rooms. I arrived with 5 minutes to spare. I bought myself a person. I was relieving a coffee, thinking it would help them on their cold walk home. As the night progressed, I made my rounds every half an hour, and when the wee hours of the morning came around, I started to doze off. I was awoken by a resident who couldn't sleep due to their neighbors crying. "If you can't get the girl back in her room and keep her quiet, I won't tell the supervisor that you were sleeping," he muttered, as if I didn't have a choice. The barracks were 3 floors high, full of people. But at this hour, the silence had a certain eeriness to it, like you could hear your own heartbeat. My footsteps echoed as in some sort of catacomb. As I made my way upstairs, I began to hear sobbing. I shook my head in disappointment. "This should be fun," I said to myself. I reached the 3rd floor and I made my way down the hallway. The sobbing sounded like it was coming from the laundry room. Maybe the poor girl didn't want to wake up her roommates, I thought to myself. As I made my way into the laundry room, the sobbing was low, like she tried to hide it. I stepped forward and asked, "Miss, are you okay?" I turned the light on and I saw a young girl sitting on the floor facing the wall, leaning on the washer machine. I asked again, "Miss, are you alright?" I put some strain on it so she may hear me, past the sobbing. I still waited for a response but still got nothing. It was late and I was tired and getting impatient. I got closer to her. "Hey lady, are you alright? I think you should call it a night," I yelled as I walked closer. Just as I did, the girl sprung up quickly. She looked sick. She had dark eyes, greasy hair, and she didn't look happy. It was almost as if I ruined her crying game. Before I could open my mouth, she let out an ear-shattering scream and it just kept climbing in pitch. I get closer to shut her up, but the noise was too much and I collapsed. The last thing I saw was the sickly girl with her menacing face staring straight at me and screaming. All of a sudden, I woke up in the office where I watched the cameras. I would have written it off as a bad dream from eating galley food, but I felt different. I felt cold. I have never left the office for the rest of my watch. A week later, I got news from May. She told me that there were complications with the baby and she had a miscarriage. I couldn't help feeling that the young girl in my night terror and the miscarriage could be linked. I'm back stateside now, and the experience has left a major impression on me. For pretext, my story begins after my first tour in Iraq. I view myself as a very tough person, but it wasn't hard to find someone tougher than me. I grew up in an area where the high desert begins to turn into the forest. This is as close as you can get to being in the woods, without actually being in the woods. There are lots of trees, but very little running over standing water. I spent much of my youth exploring this area. So much so, most people would see it as walking into their living room. As one can expect, there were three things that I wanted to do when I got home on leave. Pop my girl, drink some booze with some old friends, and go back into those woods. There was always something new to find, like where Native Americans had chiseled out some of their arrows and cool stuff like that. Just random things. Well, one night on leave, my best friend and I went out to hunt down some coyotes that had been terrorizing local ranches. Something he and I were well known for. I forgot to mention my friend was also a Marine. I called him a boot at the time because he had just gotten out of boot camp. We already determined where this pack liked to hunt at night. Coyotes are nocturnal and like to make lots of yipping noises, so they're easier to hunt at night. Well, kinda. They run around a lot. I won't get into too many details for hunting coyotes for protection reasons. So, we are getting close to their den, and we can tell because they are starting this old trick that any predator makes, the whole pretend I'm a cub or injured rabbit trick. We start our typical closing in tactic. However, while we are doing so, we are having a convo that is something along the lines of, "This is different." I make the assumption that it's because we haven't done it in a while, and they have changed some of their tactics from our last hunt, so we continue on. Nothing changes as we get closer. We get in about 25 yards of it, the den, and then we realize this is clearly not what it seems. So we make a decision to go communication silent. We move back out of the grove of trees that makes up this den, and we wait for movement. We set up defensive positions and wait for the bait to give up. I can't remember the amount of time that passed, but it was under an hour. It seems foggy to remember, but the first thing I remember is my friend calling me by my last name, something I was used to being in the military, but it was weird coming from someone I grew up with. I did nothing, for whatever reason. A couple of minutes later, we see movement. We call out to each other. Then, something emerges from the trees. What I saw was a man, but he was as tall as the trees, and the trees in this area are easily 7 to 10 feet tall at the very least. I'm terrified at this point, and I don't know if it was PTSD or just plain old fear, but I aimed in and shot at it. I know I shot it, because I'm used to shooting something much smaller in the dark. I wait for it to take a few steps and fall down, but it doesn't fall down. It just keeps walking. My friend fires and the same thing happens. I know he hit it too, as we have very similar shooting skills. At this point, we go to battle mode and keep firing, intent on killing it. Our thought that it was trying to lure us or something, because it just kept going and going. Suddenly it just stops and turns perpendicular to our positions and walks off. Now, I was using a 308 and my friend was using a 30-06. This thing would have dropped after the first 5 rounds, but it didn't. We considered chasing it, but then realized that whatever it was, we couldn't kill it. We do a tactical retreat for a quarter mile, then just book it home. We found the den a week later, and 10 miles on the opposite side of the tiny town we lived in. Whatever this thing was, it had been hunting us for a very long time and planned accordingly. It even knew how to leave a scant, feces and urine, from different members of a pack. My friends and I still hunt if needed, but we always talk about what time that we're going to go out and plan it together. We always talk about that one time though, that we were the ones that were hunted. During my time in the Marines, I never really had any odd or terrifying experiences until my last deployment, that is. During this deployment, I was sent to the Middle East and kind of tossed aside by my command because they already had one sergeant in control of the section I was supposed to be in charge of. I was then sent to security forces for the base I was on. While on security forces, Sec 4, as us in the business call it, I was assigned to be on the NCOIC, non-commissioned officer in charge, for a post on the night shift. Funnily enough, ghost stories about old military bases stretch very far in the community, and as most of them are, not very believable. While on this post, I was in charge of 4 other guys, 2 of them who were originally from the section I was recently whored out from. Every night we spent watching as cars drive in and out of our gate. We had several paranormal encounters involving that post that I won't go into because I don't have the time. Fast forward a few months of standing this post every night, Marine Corps deployment living, me and my unit returned to the United States to our home base. That's when everything started. Originally, I thought it was just me. About once or twice a week I had the same nightmare over and over, where I was strangled by a faceless shadow who was very tall and had long arms. The dream originally started as just another nightmare, possibly due to the side effect of vaccinations, changes in time zones, flight exhaustion, alcohol, etc. This went on for about 2 weeks. When I went home on leave to my home in another state, the nightmare seemed to stop for a week or two, until my last night at home. I was going to sleep as usual, in my family's spare room. I've been moved out for several years already, but it's easier to stay with them. I was sleeping with my trusty dogs. He was sleeping right next to me, keeping me company. That's when the nightmare got worse. This time, it was very vivid and surreal, where I didn't wake up at the first sign of being startled. During those dreams, everything started very boringly and normal-like. In the one I remember the most, I was going out about my daily routine on deployment. I was off shift and walking to the chow hall when I stopped to have a smoke with my guys, where I would hear them say, "Hey Sergeant, did you hear about something something?" And I would sit there and continue to make conversation for a few minutes as I took drags off my Marlboro Red, occasionally cracking jokes before giving younger Marines life advice. When walking into the front door of the chow hall, I would clear out my rifle. We had one on us at all times, and when opening the doors, everything went black, like the doors opened to black as I stepped inside the hall to look around. I would then stop and turn around and head back to the doors when everything behind me disappears as well. I'm alone, still in my gear from standing post. All of a sudden, I see out of the corner of my eye an even darker shadow moving towards me when I look straight at it, and then I was paralyzed. The shadowy figure stood around 8 feet tall and had long arms, where once it was close to me, it wrapped its hands around my neck, and I could feel myself grasping for air, slowly losing consciousness. After what felt like forever, and just screaming for what felt like days, I woke up in my head, back in my bed at home, with my dog freaking out because I was screaming. I woke the entire house up that night. About a week after that, I'd already driven back to my home base and it was back to work. While I was losing sleep, the frequency of those dreams was reaching about 3 times a week at this point. It was the end of the week and I was about to start a weekend. I was then assigned to barracks duty. Barracks duty is a mindless job. You tour the barracks, stop a drunk guy here or there, tell people to turn down their music, and occasionally have to walk to someone important who wants to check up on his Marines. So yeah, the post was 24 hours long. When one night, about 3 a.m., I was touring the smoke pit of the barracks, where I run into 2 guys who I stood post with. Me looking at the clock, I walked up, lit up a cigarette, and decided to talk with them for a few minutes before I returned to my duty hut. I asked them what they were doing up so late. Although it wasn't uncommon to see a Marine up and in the smoke pit at 3 a.m., I wanted to make some friendly conversation. My 2 friends started talking about nightmares and not sleeping. I was prying into it for a few minutes out of curiosity when one of them pulled out a sketchbook for tattoo ideas. He then said, "This is what I see in my nightmares recently." Both myself and my buddy went very silent and cold. The creature was the same thing from both of our dreams. We then went into detail and saw all of our nightmares were the same thing. Doing normal things, fades to black, shadow figure strangling us. Everything was the same, right down to the figure itself. None of us were able to sleep at night. That was over a year ago. I have since left the Marines. I decided not to re-enlist and go to college, and those nightmares have seemed to have gone away. Still, every few months I do have a nightmare similar to the ones I had. Not the same in intensity though. I wonder if my guys are having them too, or if they ever got past it. I was stationed at Beale Air Force Base in California. and they still have some of the old prisoner of war cell blocks standing as a historical monument. I still don't know why, but I decided to go out there at night to see what it was like since I had never been out there before and it was open to whoever was on base. As I walked closer to the cell blocks, it's like the air got heavier. Once I reached the cell area and stood at the doorway looking down the hall, the silence was incredible and felt as if I was just being stared down. The longer I just stood there, it felt that more and more people were staring at me over time. The base is majorly haunted, at least in my opinion. I worked in comm, and sometimes we had to work overnight. The two biggest things that stood out to me from when I would be in the building after dark was that the IT area was right next to the data center. During the day, you wouldn't hear anything, but as soon as night fell you could hear what sounded like someone stomping around, and even at times, like someone or something was hitting the walls. Another night my wife came and visited me and dropped off some food while I was doing network updates. While she was there, I went to use the restroom. As soon as I got back, she was super angry with me and kept telling me it wasn't funny and I was an a-hole. After some poking and prodding, she told me that as soon as I left the room, it felt that someone was standing behind her, and she could feel their warm breath on the back of her neck. It's also important that the doorway to leave my office had to make a left to go to the restroom, and that she swore that not a second later, after I made that left down the hall, someone kept sprinting back and forth from the left to the right, but would only do it when she wasn't directly looking at the hallway. And here's the last one. We lived on base in the newer house. It was a nice new townhouse. Our family and stuff got to live there as well. Our child had the room right at the top of the stairs. This is important because I moved in first while waiting for my family and stuff to get there. During this time I had our dog and cat with me at night, and they would both sit at the bottom of the stairs and just look up at the top of the stairs like someone was standing there. Then, the first night my wife and kids were moved in, there was this weird feeling that when you were coming back from the kitchen area, they would stare at you, just like there was a man. Another weird thing that happened that same night is that my wife came around that same corner and swears she saw a man at the top of the stairs and asked me who that man was. This moved on to her hating to be alone in her room, and she would always get up in the middle of the night and come sleep with us. She would always say that there was a man in her room watching her sleep. Even during the day when she would be in her room, she would hear that there was like a full conversation going on. Sometimes my wife would pass by her room, and it would sound like she was having a conversation with a full-blown person. There was nothing even playing on TV or anything. The final thing I'd like to mention is that a lot of things would randomly go missing and show up in the strangest places after we would spend days looking for them. We still don't have an explanation for any of this. It still happens to this day. Let me know if you guys know anything, but I definitely do think this Air Force base is haunted. I haven't told this story to many people except for my wife and a few other of my close friends. It happened while I was stationed in the Army as a radio operator during the Vietnam War, and I haven't forgot it to this day. I was a young recruit, freshly drafted out of high school and didn't know much about the war. I had no idea what I was getting into or what it was all for, but I did know that I was going to serve my country. We arrived there on a Friday evening and got loaded onto many buses to be taken to our barracks. The air was very humid and the soil was soaking wet due to the storm passing overhead. I vividly remember the drive and how it stunk like a sewer. My first night was uneventful and quiet, but we all felt the tense atmosphere as our drill sergeants taunted us with stories during basic training. I remember the half moon right over my head, which kept peeking out from over the clouds, and all of us were just sitting around telling jokes. I was more of a technical guy and didn't have much aptitude for comedy, so I just listened in. My duty was to manage communications between my unit and all of our other guys so that everyone knew what was going on everywhere else. I carried a box on my back, which was the size of a radio device back then, and was a ton more equipment and supplies than we would carry now. I was quickly assigned to a tight-knit unit who had just lost their communications operator to a landmine, and I remember the first time we made contact with the enemy. It was the loudest thing I had ever heard. We were in a dense part of the jungle and couldn't see the enemy at all, but we ducked for cover as soon as they began firing at us, and we opened up in their general direction in return. The chaos felt like it lasted forever, but we probably ceased fire after a couple of minutes. We advanced forward to close in on the enemy position and secure the area, and it was the first time I ever saw the enemy up close. There they were. A couple of dead Viet Cong soldiers laying in a pool of their own blood. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. 3 human beings that were alive just moments ago, now gone. Young guys who maybe had sisters and brothers and parents. They were probably just chilling around moments before we arrived, and here we are moments later looking at their motionless, dead bodies. I must say that I felt justified just because the enemy would have probably done the same thing to me instead. A few days later, we got assigned to a different location, which saw heavier casualties and needed more support. I grew accustomed to the violence and saw many of our young men die painfully. One day I was told by my NCO that someone wanted to speak with me. I was greeted by a soldier who was in his late 50s who looked totally out of place. His demeanor was calculated and predictive, and even my commanding officer seemed to have turned into a yes man in front of him. He introduced himself as Frederick Douglas, an intelligent officer stationed nearby, and I was going to be assigned to him as an RTO for his unit. The guys in my unit were like family to me, but orders are orders and I had no choice, so I got on the Huey and went with him. We landed in a heavily wooded area next to a few Viet Cong huts. It was heavily built up by the enemy, and I could definitely imagine the fight must have taken place here. There were some guys who had gas masks on and other soldiers standing nearby, but they didn't seem to notice me or even care that I was there. It was a very strange atmosphere that didn't feel quite right. These guys didn't act like normal soldiers and definitely didn't have the look or fear or anything like that. I even tried talking to some of them, but all I got was strange emotionless glares like they were infected with something. Whatever it was, they all had it, and it made me feel very uneasy. Officer Douglas and I entered one of the smaller huts and I was told to stay put until someone would come and get me. I really should have stayed there and waited, but I was too curious and apprehensive to relax. So, I just made my way out towards the main hut and took a sneak peek inside. What I saw made my stomach drop like never before. On a makeshift table lay 6 murky containers. Each one of them had severed heads of a guerrilla fighter inside, with several tubes and wires protruding from them. A green liquid seemed to be reaching with the heads as their mouths and eyes were quivering like they were kind of still alive. I suddenly felt a hand grab onto my shoulder, an intelligent officer Douglas, and he looked very upset. I meekly asked what they were doing inside here, and he angrily said that I should not have gone in there and sent me back to my hut. We must have been attacked or something, because I woke up a day later in a triage and several broken ribs and fractured collarbone and no memory of anything that happened after that. I never saw Officer Frederick Douglas or those officers ever again, if that was even his real name. I often wonder what those guys were doing back then. Maybe they were trying to gather intelligence from the dead enemy soldiers or something. Either way, it was a strange experience that I will never forget.
I'm Nightmare Files, and this is my personal scary story. I will not use any names in this, at least not the real names. We had already been in Afghanistan for 2 weeks at this point, and our FOB had been attacked at least 6 times already. If you don't know what a FOB is, it's a forward operating base. It was a very small blackout FOB, and we call it blackout because at night, we couldn't have any lights on outside due to indirect fire or sniper fire. Anyways, a week goes by and nothing happens. So our company is being told that we're doing a mission together, a company mission. Usually we had gone on missions at the platoon level, which is one level under company. By this time of deployment, we had been on a few key leader engagements, and nothing much happened. The only contact we received was at the FOB. But a lot of us had a bad feeling about this one. To make a long story short, and we ended up going on mission, and we moved on foot about 2 kilometers to the east at around 1 a.m., and we set up our patrol base at around 3 a.m., and then sent out each platoon to their own sector. Each platoon moved a few kilometers away, while headquarters stayed at our patrol base. I'm on the radio talking with our forward observers from each platoon, and they're reporting up that they can hear the enemy, but they can't see them. At this point, it's still dark, and we are basically in the backyard of the enemy, and this area is known for the Taliban. These guys are freaking out on the radio, as they keep saying the Taliban is out there, but we can't see them. Then at our patrol base, some local man walks up, and our interpreter ends up talking to him. As he's speaking to the interpreter is telling us everything he's saying. At this point, I'm holding my weapon pointed down to the ground, and I slip my finger to the trigger. And I look at the interpreter, with him not knowing that I understand everything he's saying. I tell him, that's not what he's saying, while looking him straight in the eyes. My commander looked at me and said, "What?" I repeated, "That's not what he's saying. The interpreter is lying." The interpreter was telling us that this guy wanted food and water. What he was really saying is that there's Taliban all around us, and they outnumber us, and they knew about everything we were doing before we even came out here, and that they're going to attack us and our fob. At this point, the interpreter looks at me with wide eyes and starts to run toward his bag. As the interpreter is running toward his bag, he screams, "Allah Akbar." When he reached in his bag, he grabbed a detonator, and he squeezed it, and then, boom. He had a bomb in the middle of our patrol base, but it only injured a few of us. He was immediately shot, and all hell broke loose. Shots are coming from everywhere, but we can't pinpoint where. Immediately, 7 people were shot. I got down next to my commander, and I'm on my radio talking to my forward observers, who are trying to call in artillery and mortars. I'm trying to aim my weapon, but can't tell who is who because it's so dark. We have on night vision, but they suck. Guys are screaming that they are hit, and some guys are cowering behind boulders. Then over the radio I hear, I'm not going to use his real name, Sergeant Smith is down. Luckily at this point the sun is starting to come up, and a few of us run over to where Sergeant Smith was, and I saw him. I saw Sergeant Smith, face down and not moving. The medic and I grab and drag him. My buddy was right next to him, and he saw Sergeant Smith's face when we turned him over, and he started crying and freaking out because his face looked like he was screaming, but it was just stuck there. I stopped for a second when I saw his face, but I snapped right out of it. This wasn't my first deployment. This wasn't my first dead body. Sergeant Smith was one of those guys that was really untouchable, an alpha male, very in shape and had everything going for him. When the guys saw that he was killed, they definitely thought that they were next because he was like a super soldier to these guys. I asked my buddy, where did he see the enemy? Where's the Taliban? And he pointed and said 10 meters that way. I thought to myself, 10 meters? That means that they're inside our patrol base now. I pause and I look around. I never seen so many self-proclaimed tough guys turn into little girls so quick, and so many guys that didn't believe in God start praying for God. I will not go into everything else because it's pretty hard for me. Just know that some of us had to fight with our hands because the enemy was so close to us. We only lost 1 guy that day, but we had 18 people wounded. 13 of those people were shot, but everyone was mentally wounded, and still are. We all thought that we were untouchable because we jumped out of planes, knew how to fight, and lifted weights. Everyone is a tough guy until they have to do tough guy shit.
So my dad was in the Navy for 20 years, and I was alive for the last 13 of those years. Normally, Military families, at least for the US military, travel around a lot, and it's not unusual for a family to be uprooted every 2 or 3 years. I was lucky in that after my parents got married, my dad was stationed in Virginia, somewhere in 1993, where both my younger sister and I were born. Shortly after my sister's birth in 1996, we moved to North Florida and have been there ever since. We even lived in the same on-base house for about a decade, from 1997 to 2007, when my dad retired. Needless to say, we grew up used to friends coming and going, depending on their parents' duty station, while we oddly didn't go anywhere. The way the base was set up was that the two houses were connected and went to 123 Street Name A and 123 Street Name B. The house my family lived in was B, and in the early 2000s, a family of 4 moved into A. I was in kindergarten and first grade at that time, so I was at the age where I'm not quite understanding the ideas of divorce and remarriage. The family that moved next door was a blended family in several ways. The husband was black, the wife was white, and the daughter and stepdaughter was white. And the 3-year-old was mixed. I remember this was super confusing for me because I didn't understand how the daughter was white, not realizing she had a different father. He had a brother in the area, so his niece would come over, and she was over so often I thought she lived there, which only added to the confusion. Anyway, apparently they weren't very good neighbors. They'd have house parties at all hours and pound on the walls, which my mom reported to housing. She told me and my sister never to go into their house, and I had no ideas as to why. I did, however, go into the house once for some reason. It stuck in my memory. I had been playing a weird kind of catch with the 2-year-old who wasn't allowed outside and I wasn't allowed inside. So he stood in the doorway and I stood in their covered driveway throwing a ball back and forth. Eventually, the ball went somewhere the 2-year-old wasn't able to reach, so I went outside to retrieve the ball, justifying it as I had only been there for a few minutes after that. The way the house was set up was that the door at the side of the house leads directly into the kitchen, which was separated from the living room by a half wall to the left. I remember going in and looking into the living room, and it was just a complete mess. I couldn't believe how dirty it was. Then out of the blue, the family moved. Usually there was some sort of warning when a family left, but this one, there wasn't. I eventually forgot about them for the most part and continued with my life. Fast forward to 2006 or 2007 and I'm in the 6th or 7th grade. I noticed the niece at my school, but she doesn't remember me. Fast forward again to September 2008 and it's the orientation for my freshman year of high school. She's in one of my classes, so our parents end up meeting and talking. That weekend my mom sits me down and finally explains what happened. Apparently, the husband had gotten into trouble with housing, so his family was kicked out. Well, they left the place an absolute pigsty. The policy for that is the housing sends a cleaning crew, and it comes out of the person's paycheck. Well, a cleaning lady reached up to see if anything was left on a shelf in a master closet, and found something, a stack of pictures. When she looked at the pictures, they were of the girls in my neighborhood, and they were incredibly inappropriate. Keep in mind, these girls ranged from the ages of 5 to 10. Immediately, the base's police were called and he was arrested. NCIS ended up investigating it, and because my house was connected to theirs, my dad was interviewed about what he knew. He was shown the pictures and asked to identify the girls and if my sister and I had ever gone into the house. My mom told me that my father told her that the pictures were the most depraved things he had ever seen, and they were burned into his memory for the rest of his life. It turned out all of my friends were his victims, including his own stepdaughter, and that he had been bribing them with toys and candy. My family, and another one, were the only 2 spared because my mom didn't allow me or my sister in that house, and the other family's daughter didn't fit into his age range. My mom explained that she had gotten an uneasy feeling from him, and couldn't explain why. She even tried ignoring it because he was in the Navy. In the end, the couple got a divorce. The husband went to a military prison. He has since been released. And the wife moved back to Canada with her daughter and left her son with her former brother-in-law to raise. I'm in the Navy. I was stationed with a squadron in Washington State. One night I was standing watch, and as the night shift was leaving, my friend stayed back and talked for a few minutes. I don't know how it got to the subjects of ghosts, but my friend told me one of the civilians who worked at the supply department said their supply area was haunted by a gray woman, and that they had been hearing voices. I kept an open mind, although the description was just way too generic. Flash forward to the next time I was on watch. We had to move a new hangar across the street. The hangar where my friend told me the ghost still belonged, I decided I needed to check it out that night, even though it was abandoned and empty. The night of my watch, I decided that I was going to try to summon whatever that civilian had seen. So, what do you think I did? I decided I was going to use the woman's bathroom on the second floor. I walked into the bathroom, go into a stall, lock it behind me, and sit down in the toilet to let nature do its thing. After I was done, I decided to just sit there to see if anything would happen. And I swear to God this next part is real. All of a sudden, the stall unlocks, and I could see the bolt turn on its own. The door swung slowly and creepily inward. There was nothing or anyone on the other side of the door. I knew that whatever it is, it did not like me being there. I finished up my business and pretty much ran out of that hangar. I don't know what's out there, but there's definitely more after death, I think. I am 24 now. I am a female and have moved around a lot with my family as my dad was in the military. At the time, my family and I were living in Virginia, near the historic Triangle area. We lived on a military base that had a lot of wooded land with a few roads through it for people to bike on, and it's standard for military stuff. My family, some friends, and I would bike on these roads often. It was very relaxing, and as we traveled in a group, we weren't worried about coyotes or bears or anything of the like. However, we kids were told to be very careful, to never go back on those roads without a parent or ever split from the group when hiking or biking. My best friend at the time and I chalked it up to them being afraid of us being hurt by hunters. The base often allowed hunters in to help take care of any crazy deer populations, or to keep us away in case the military were doing some crazy stuff back there. As you can imagine, since I'm posting here, we were wrong. Though, she didn't get hunted. We were on our bike rides. About 3 families all in our group. My best friends and I started lagging behind, and eventually, we were at the back of the group. As we rounded a corner, I kid you not, a snake fell from the tree branches above onto my handlebars. I naturally wrecked and freaked out, refusing to get back on my bike. I know, temper tantrum of the century. My friend laughed and just rode off, and I called her a traitor for that. I stood there staring at my bike and then down the road and back to my bike. I wasn't getting back on that thing and basically said screw it. I'm walking back as we weren't too far in. I knew the roads very well, even the gravel ones, because my dad would drive me around back there in his Jeep. So I was confident as I walked down the road and turned down a dirt road. As I'm walking down this road, I start hearing rustling behind me. I shrug it off as I'm thinking it's a rabbit, since we had quite a few of those and we've already seen tons of them today. The rustling grew closer, and then was past me and in front of me. Then it stopped. I stopped and decided to bark at it to scare it off. Branches snapped in response. I screamed and took off running. Classically, I ran in the direction of home, which was right by this thing. As I'm running, I hear a growl, but it doesn't sound like a dog growl. It was deeper. I'm not sure how to describe this. It was like there was more than one growl, if that makes any sense. Multiple pitches all rolled into one, and it was chilling. I ran like my life depended on it, and this thing kept pace with me the entire time. Branches snapping and leaves rustling, but still deep enough in the woods that I couldn't make out exactly what it was. The road curved sharply to the left and my feet slid out from under me as I tried to make the turn. I ended up sliding off the road and into a little ditch before the woods began, I'd say it was a 3-foot grassy area off the road. As I scrambled to my feet, I'm pretty sure I was crying. The thing's growling, and growling got louder. It seemed like the growl honestly turned into a laugh. I bolted, and I ran and ran, but didn't feel like I was getting any closer to home. After the curve, I should have seen the main road, but I didn't see it. Off to the left before the main road, there would be a little ruin of sorts. My frantic mind thought if maybe I could get to the ruin, I would be safe. The thing was crashing through the woods on my right, and I saw my life flash before my eyes. I saw the ruins, and I could have laughed in relief, had the thing not been chuckling at me behind me. I could hear it starting to move, and I jumped and dived and fell into the foundation of the ruin. It was 4 walls with an open doorway that I ran into. I don't know why I thought I would be safe there, but I think to this day that I did that. I would have never made it home. The thing was just toying with me and would have soon moved in. As it was, as I turned around in the dirt and looked back to the doorway, I saw fur. Not the brown and red of coyotes. It was black and it was wiry looking. I didn't see a face, just the fur. And these mangled legs. The joints didn't look right. They were like the normal dog legs, but the joints were backward. I would have thought it was going the other direction, but it was clearly moving to the right when the legs were bent. It growled. It sounded meaner than the earlier growls. I expected it to turn around and charge through the doorway at any minute. But I just watched it circle the ruin before going back off to the woods. I didn't leave the ruin until a base officer came and found me. She looked terrified too. My dad recently told me that he had seen hoof prints that had paw pad prints mixed in with it, like some weird goat-wolf hybrid. He also heard laughter behind him as he grabbed stuff from his truck in the morning. The girl who saved me that day says she saw the same footprints. We didn't speak until we reached my house, when my parents were waiting to hug me and yell at me. I didn't tell them what chased me, but when my dad told me years later what he saw and the officer saw, I don't know what it was, but it still freaks me out. The deformed legs makes me think it's a skinwalker. Every time we went riding after that, I would hear growling and catch glimpses of black fur in the woods. I don't know what it was, but I do know for sure it was hunting me. One thing I still don't know is why didn't it come into the ruin after me? Why did the military base have these weird Native American ruins anyway? I guess I can explain that by it just being there when the military base was made. But it's just weird. Thanks for listening to these allegedly true military stories. These were some really creepy events. The military holds all kinds of horror, from witnessing your friends die to allegedly paranormal happenings tormenting whole squadrons. You never know what you will hear coming out of war and from military bases. Once again, much love and appreciation to my friend Nightmare Files, who read story number 2. That story was actually his own personal story from his time in the military. Be sure to subscribe to him and check out his videos. He does them on all kinds of spooky things, and I know you'll love them. Much thanks to everyone who is a veteran and is currently serving in our military. It is much appreciated that you keep our freedom safe. If you have a story you would like to share in a future video, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I am always looking for new stories to share. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp, and I'm sure they'd love to hear it. It's stories like yours that keep this channel going, and I truly appreciate everybody who sends in their stories. Also, if you guys want to take Swamp Dweller Scary Stories on the go, no matter where you are, go to anchor.fm/swampdweller. You can find that link in the description or pinned comment as well. It's a great place to download stories, hear them on the go, and it supports the channel. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.